Susan, a top lawyer, was supposed to have a perfect life, but a fire tragically claimed her parents' lives. Her younger sister narrowly survived but was left with severe burns. The hospital informed Susan that her sister might never wake up. Susan's misfortune didn't end there. Her law firm was shut down, her assets frozen, and with mounting medical bills, no one was willing to lend her money. All of this stemmed from a threatening text message. When Susan returned to the hospital, the medical bills had already reached $200,000. Surprisingly, someone had paid the bill for her, but the condition was that she must go to the Cloud Hotel. At the hotel, Susan met a mysterious man. Nothing comes for free. He laid out his terms. She must become a corporate spy. This man was Adrian, the second son of the richest man in the world. He needed Susan to infiltrate his younger brother Bryce's company as a mole. Susan was reluctant at first, but when Adrian offered $1 million, she couldn't refuse. Everything went according to plan. Adrian, using Bryce's nice guy personality, easily helped Susan get the job. Sure enough, Bryce took an interest in her. He helped her with her injuries and even asked about her motives for applying. Susan played her role perfectly, eventually securing the position. Not long after, she received her second task. Adrian cruelly taunted her, telling her to jump into a pool even though she couldn't swim, promising $1 million as a reward if she did. Without hesitation, Susan jumped. After watching her struggle briefly, Adrian dove in to save her. Once on shore, he couldn't resist kissing her. Her bravery and beauty captivated him, and they ended up sleeping together. The third task was to cause Bryce's girlfriend to miscarry. This task troubled Susan deeply. She couldn't cross that moral line, but Adrian threatened her. If she failed, not only would she lose the money, but he would also pull the plug on her sister's oxygen. Ultimately, Susan was forced to give in. On the day of Bryce's engagement party, Susan was about to drug his fiancé's food when Bryce unexpectedly walked in. Panicked, she dropped the bird's nest dish on the ground, unable to go through with it. She couldn't bring herself to harm the kind-hearted Bryce. As the engagement ceremony began and Bryce was about to announce the good news, a man burst in, claiming to be the father of Bryce's fiancé's unborn child, throwing the event into chaos. This man had been planted by Susan, and she felt immense guilt towards Bryce. Later, Susan met with Adrian in private. Furious with her for acting on her own, Adrian punished her. Susan stood her ground, explaining that although she wasn't a good person, it was a case she shouldn't have taken that led to her parents' deaths. After a moment of silence, Adrian relented and paid her the reward. Meanwhile, Bryce drowned his sorrows in alcohol. When he sobered up, he asked Susan to stay by his side. On the other hand, Adrian had started investigating the truth behind Susan's parents' deaths. He cryptically remarked that some people only seem kind on the surface. Could the misfortunes of Susan's family be somehow connected to the three brothers of the richest family? On this day, the three brothers met with their billionaire father. The father announced that the family needed to form a marriage alliance with the Anderson family and launch a new company project. Whoever successfully secured the marriage would receive 10% of the company shares. Since the eldest Anderson daughter had feelings for Bryce, he had been the most likely candidate, but due to the recent scandal, he was disqualified, leaving only Adrian and their eldest brother Alan in the running. Suddenly, Bryce's girlfriend barged in, claiming she had been threatened by Adrian and was about to expose Susan's involvement. Adrian quickly stopped her, allowing Susan to continue her undercover role at Bryce's side. Alan seized the opportunity to stir things up, enraging their father, who furiously declared that Alan would take charge of the new project. As a result, Adrian was punished with a whipping by his father, who, in a fit of rage, revealed a family secret. Adrian was an illegitimate child. Susan had overheard the servants gossiping that Adrian's mother and Bryce's mother were sisters, but Adrian's mother had killed her own sister. Seeing Adrian in such a sorry state, Alan was quite pleased. Susan went to Adrian's room and found him collapsed on the floor. Feeling pity, she tended to his wounds, noticing the old scars on his body. Adrian told her that there was someone behind Bryce's girlfriend's outburst. Susan suspected Alan, believing Bryce wasn't capable of something so underhanded. This infuriated Adrian, who angrily kissed her and assigned her a new task to seduce Bryce. Once again, they ended up sleeping together. Susan mocked Adrian, calling him generous for offering his used woman to his brother. Adrian was unfazed, telling her that after the mission, he would arrange the best dermatologist for her sister. Meanwhile, Alan and Bryce secretly reveled in their success. It turned out that the entire scheme had been orchestrated by the two brothers to gain control of the new project. Bryce even mentioned that his girlfriend had already been discarded and encouraged Alan to pursue the Anderson heiress. Alan believed him, unaware that Bryce wasn't as simple as he seemed. At the new project's launch ceremony, Alan gave an impassioned speech. The billionaire father introduced Alan to Cdrama Anderson, but Cdrama showed no interest in him. Instead, she was drawn to Adrian's rebellious charm. The father also encouraged Bryce to pursue Cdrama, but Bryce deferred, saying his brothers were more suitable. When Susan saw Adrian leading Cdrama out, she realized her task of seducing Bryce was merely to create an opportunity for Adrian to secure the marriage alliance. To divert attention, Susan pretended to sprain her ankle, forcing Bryce to carry her away. They happened to run into Cdrama, who, displeased by the sight of Bryce carrying another woman, made some sarcastic remarks. Adrian seemed a bit irritated by Cdrama's barbs. Later, when Bryce brought Susan back to her room, she wiped away the lipstick stain left on him. But all of this was observed by Adrian. After Bryce left, Adrian aggressively demanded Susan's attention, and the two exchanged harsh words before sleeping together again. Later, Bryce came to check on Susan at her door while Adrian, inside the room, deliberately teased Susan, forcing her to awkwardly cover up and hide their relationship. That night, at the naming ceremony for the new hotel, Alan publicly proposed to Cdrama. Adrian stepped in to defuse the situation, only to be beaten by Alan in front of everyone. Alan deliberately insulted Adrian, but to his surprise, this only made Cdrama more interested in Adrian. She even accepted his ring. After the banquet, Susan and Adrian met their respective partners. Cdrama was very displeased with Susan, considering her nothing more than a poor woman who had no business standing by Bryce's side. She noticed that Susan was wearing the same earrings as her and demanded an explanation from Adrian. Unexpectedly, Adrian pulled an identical pair of earrings from his pocket and handed them to Cdrama. That night, Adrian held Susan, believing she had successfully seduced Bryce. Susan questioned him. If the mission was complete, why did he make her offend Cdrama? Adrian smirked coldly, saying women should always feel threatened, and Cdrama wouldn't dare cross him. Susan deliberately provoked Adrian, and in response, he bit her. Bryce suddenly arrived at the room, throwing Susan into a panic, while Adrian casually teased her. After Susan and Bryce exchanged goodnights, Adrian grew intensely jealous. Soon after, Susan received a call from the hospital informing her that her sister had been moved from the intensive care unit to a regular ward to make way for a privileged patient. Furious, Susan learned that the hospital had even refunded her payment to prioritize the VIP patient. That night, Susan drank heavily, and Bryce came to comfort her, resolving the issue with the hospital. Touched by his kindness, Susan even joked that she would work herself to the bone for him. Time passed, and Adrian and Cdrama's engagement party arrived. However, Adrian was late due to a car accident. His car had been sabotaged, all part of Alan's scheme. Cdrama furiously blamed Alan. Seeing Susan and Bryce's closeness, Adrian was consumed with jealousy. Their interaction was noticed by Cdrama, who humiliated Susan, though Bryce quickly stepped in to defend her. Bryce then shared a dark family secret. It turned out that Bryce and Adrian's mothers were twin sisters who both fell in love with the billionaire father. Adrian's mother, in a fit of madness, stabbed Bryce's mother to death, with Adrian acting as an accomplice. Afterward, Adrian's mother disappeared without a trace. Back at the banquet, the billionaire father mingled with his sons and guests. Since Bryce had stomach problems and couldn't drink, Susan drank 3 glasses on his behalf, which infuriated Adrian with jealousy. After the event, Adrian dragged Susan into the woods and kissed her harshly, as if to punish her. Bryce appeared suddenly, but luckily, Adrian maintained his composure and didn't reveal their relationship. After Susan passed out from drinking, Adrian gently carried her back home. The next day, Susan woke up to find that Adrian had given her 3 days off from being a spy. He had even prepared breakfast for her, but Susan's response was to vomit. She rejected the caretaker Adrian had sent to look after her. Later, at the hospital, Susan learned she was 7 weeks pregnant, and the child was Adrian's. She decided to have an abortion, feeling that the child was not conceived out of love. Unexpectedly, Bryce showed up at the hospital, telling her that he had searched every hospital in the city to find her. Susan was deeply moved, and Bryce soon learned about the pregnancy. Bryce offered to be the father of the child and promised to take care of both Susan and her baby. Wanting to escape Adrian's control, Susan agreed. The next day, Bryce publicly announced Susan's pregnancy, which enraged Adrian, though he kept his anger in check. The billionaire father approved of the marriage. When Bryce stepped away, Adrian cornered Susan by a pool table, demanding to know whose child it really was. Susan provocatively hinted that she had completed her mission well. Adrian, suppressing his fury, suggested they meet that night. Cdrama attempted to humiliate Susan again, but Adrian stepped in to defend her. Noticing Adrian's constant protection of Susan, Cdrama grew suspicious, but Adrian told her not to overthink it. That night, Adrian, filled with rage, pinned Susan down and kissed her with anger and resentment, refusing to believe she had truly betrayed him. Susan begged him to let her go, and her look of disgust wounded him deeply. Just then, Susan received a call from the hospital. Her sister had finally woken up. Adrian accompanied her to the hospital. At the hospital, Adrian helped Susan resolve the issue when the staff gave her a hard time. With her sister's recovery, Susan decided to abandon the mission and live a peaceful life with Bryce. However, their conversation ended on bad terms. While Susan was trying on her wedding dress, Adrian suddenly barged in, and the two had a heated argument. Susan, in a fit of anger, insulted Adrian and his mother, calling them both crazy. The atmosphere became unbearably tense. Adrian coldly responded that his mother wasn't insane. The tension was palpable. Cdrama, who had her eye on Susan's wedding dress, appeared. Adrian used this moment to defuse the situation and purposely embarrassed Bryce by pointing out the bite mark on Susan's shoulder, leaving everyone stunned. Cdrama also noticed blood on Adrian's lip and questioned him, but Adrian brushed it off. Susan then received a call from the police, informing her that her sister had survived an attempted murder at the hospital. Based on her sister's description, Susan suspected Adrian was behind it. Furious, she stormed into Adrian's home, and they had a massive fight. In the heat of the moment, Adrian made an offhand remark, not expecting Susan to threaten to jump from a window. He managed to stop her just in time. Susan demanded they never cross paths again, and Adrian reluctantly agreed. Determined to get to the bottom of her sister's attack, Adrian began investigating and uncovered that Bryce was infertile. It seemed that the case with Susan's sister was somehow connected to Bryce. Adrian revealed Bryce's condition to Susan, warning her not to be naive. The two argued again, and this time Cdrama walked in on them. Angry, Cdrama demanded an explanation, to which Adrian coolly responded that their marriage was merely a business arrangement. He would never love her. Meanwhile, Bryce had been preparing baby items, and Susan began to grow suspicious of his selflessness. That day, Susan's sister discovered that her phone had been bugged. Susan suspected Adrian but decided to remain silent to lure out the real culprit. Susan deliberately dropped a hint over the phone, saying she was going to terminate the pregnancy because it was unfair to Bryce. Then, she purposely threw herself down the stairs and passed out, only to be saved by Adrian. He stayed by her side, and when Cdrama arrived at the hospital, she realized it was Susan who had called her there. Susan then revealed her affair with Adrian and that the baby was his. Just as Cdrama was reeling from the situation, Bryce unexpectedly arrived at the hospital. This was not part of Susan's plan, and she was taken aback. Bryce learned that the child was Adrian's and also discovered everything Susan had done, yet he still insisted on marrying her. It was at this moment that Susan finally realized who had been eavesdropping on her all along. She decided to take the risk and continue the charade. Elsewhere, Adrian and Cdrama had a massive fight and decided to call off the engagement, with Adrian remarking how tiresome the relationship had become. Adrian also revealed a shocking truth. Cdrama's lover had contracted HPV, and he suggested she get tested. When Adrian arrived at Susan's hospital room, he found out she had accepted Bryce's marriage proposal. Susan left the hospital with Bryce, but as she reflected on everything, she began to realize how dangerous Bryce truly was. Neither his ex-girlfriend's child nor her own was Bryce's, yet he selflessly cared for them. Why? Adrian tracked down Susan and warned her to leave Bryce immediately, saying he was dangerous. But Susan knew that every move she made was being monitored by Bryce, so she had no choice but to keep up the act. Meanwhile, Alan's project failure had caused a major financial loss for the billionaire father, even leading to workers' deaths. Enraged, the father berated Alan and decided to change his will, appointing a new heir. Alan discovered this and, furious, teamed up with Bryce to take down Adrian. As Susan dug deeper into Adrian and Bryce's family, she uncovered a horrifying truth. Her family's fire was linked to the three brothers. She had merely been a pawn in their corporate war. Enraged, she confronted Adrian, and just as she suspected, Bryce soon appeared. Susan was now certain that Bryce wasn't the innocent man he appeared to be. She and her sister devised a plan to trap Bryce, planting a listening device in his car. The night before the wedding, Susan lost contact with Adrian, and an unsettling feeling took over. She suspected something had happened to him. On the day of the wedding, wearing a hidden earpiece, she overheard Bryce and Alan's conspiracy. As it turned out, Adrian had indeed been in a car accident. At the hospital, as Susan stood by Adrian's unconscious body, she realized she had fallen in love with him. To her surprise, Adrian woke up shortly after. It turned out everything had been part of his plan. Adrian admitted that the fire was connected to him, but he never intended to kill anyone. He only wanted to scare Susan because she was working for a rival. However, the real arsonist was someone else, the same person who had called for help that night. Meanwhile, Alan had a fierce argument with their father, which triggered a stroke. After recovering, Alan and Bryce pressured their father into signing a new will. As it seemed the villains were on the brink of victory, Bryce smugly visited Adrian's hospital room, gloating as he confessed to everything. He claimed Susan was his, and all of their father's wealth would belong to him and Alan. Outside the room, Susan overheard the entire truth. With Adrian and the billionaire father seemingly defeated, Bryce began flaunting his power within the company, revealing his true nature to Susan and threatening her. Just as Bryce and Alan believed they had won, the billionaire father and Adrian made a sudden appearance. In front of the press, Susan exposed the truth, revealing that Bryce was the real culprit behind the fire. Then, Bryce's biological mother appeared, confessing that she had intentionally dressed in her sister's clothes the night she killed Adrian's mother. Adrian and his mother had been the real victims all along, while Bryce had been lying from the start. In the end, Bryce was arrested by the police. Back home, the billionaire father severely punished Alan and announced that Adrian would inherit the company. After everything they had been through, Adrian and Susan looked at each other with a sense of relief and understanding. They decided to leave the past behind and start fresh.